Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. This is Spudlow, and in this video I'll be covering the second round of the April 2012 tournament at Darkside Comics in Sarasota between the Dark Elves and the Bretonnians. This was a 2,350-point tournament with the 8th edition rules. The scenario for this round was a battle line engagement with additional battle points for killing wizards that generate power dice, killing all the opposing characters, and for capturing more standards than your opponent. Bonus objective points are also given for killing an enemy that has a bound item or spell, having a non-fleeing unit in the enemy's deployment zone, and not having an enemy non-fleeing unit in your deployment zone. Additionally, the scenario uses the special rule Favored Wins. This causes each player to roll a d3 in each magic phase, and the victor receives the difference up to the normal maximum of 12, of course. The Bretonnians win the placement roll and begin with a unit of 3 Pegasus Knights in the rear center of their deployment area. The Dark Elves follow with 35 Black Arc Corsairs that have extra hand weapons, 6 Nights Errant for the Bretonnians, and then a Hydra for the Dark Elves, followed by 6 more Nights Errant, 35 Executioners that have great weapons, a Chariot Proxy, which is another 6 Nights Errant, and then a Black Cauldron with a Hag Queen for the Dark Elves. The Bretonnians make 2 consecutive placements here, 6 Questing Knights and then 9 Nights Errant. I assume they just lost track, but the Dark Elves made 2 placements of 33 Spearmen and then a second Hydra to even it out. The Bretonnians place 9 more Knights Errant just off the top of the screen, and then 9 Grail Knights just below them. The Dark Elves have a level 4 Supreme Sorceress and 2 Noble Masters, one of which is the BSB that all go with the Executioners. And the Bretonnians have a Mounted Paladin that sits with the Knights Errant just above the Pegasus Knights, another Mounted Paladin BSB, and a Mounted Lord General that go with the upper off-screen Knights Errant, and a Mounted Damsel of the Lady just on the far side of the Grail Knights. For spell generation, the Bretonnians have a level 1 caster that gets Flock of Doom, and the Dark Elves have a level 4 Supreme Sorceress that ends up with Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma, Holcom's Mind Razor, the Withering and Penumbral Pendulum, and she also knows the signature spell Power of Darkness. The Bretonnians forego their roll for the first turn in order to get a starting blessing from the lady. The Dark Elves start their first turn, and as their only movement, the Black Cauldron shifts to the right. In the magic phase, the Dark Elves end up with 10 power dice against 6 dispel dice. They first cast Power of Darkness with 2 dice and get 3 dice back. Next, they use 4 dice for Melkoth's Miasma on the Grail Knights and get Irresistible Force. It lowers weapon skill, ballistic skill, initiative, and movement by 1, and the resultant backlash takes out 9 executioners, puts a wound on the sorceress, and takes 6 dice out of the power pool. But the Dark Elf player decides not to bother using the final die against 6 dispel dice. On the Bretonnians' turn, the cavalry units maneuver for better position, while the off-screen Knights Errant go for the left flank, and the Pegasus Knights go for the right. The Bretonnians forego their first magic phase, and with no shooting, they move into the second turn. The Dark Elves forego their movement and head into a rather rough magic phase. A roll of Snake Eyes for Winds of Fate and no additional dice from the scenario leaves the Dark Elves with 2 power dice against 1 dispel die. They use a single die to attempt Power of Darkness, but they roll a 1, preventing their only caster from attempting anything else. On the Bretonnians' turn, the Chariot Proxy charges the Hydra and succeeds, and another unit of Knights Errant charge the Executioners, but they fail. For normal moves, the upper Knights Errant and Pegasus Knights get set up for flank charges, as the other cavalry position for a frontal assault. The Bretonnians forego their magic phase, and in close combat, the Hydra uses its breath weapon and takes out 2 models, and gets 1 more in regular attacks, but these attacks should have been made at Initiative 2 after the Knights Errant's attacks. The handlers do 1 more, then the Knights and Mounts hit back but fail to wound. The Knights Errant lose the combat by 3 and get caught when they flee. On the third turn, the upper Hydra succeeds at charging the Grail Knights, but the lower Hydra fails to charge the larger Errant block. For normal movement, the Corsairs move out of the upper Errant's charge arc, with the Executioners and Cauldron keeping pace, while the Spearmen angle to prevent the flank charge. Winds of Magic and Scenario rules gives the Dark Elves 10 power dice against 7 spell dice. They start with 2 dice for Power of Darkness and get 3 dice back. Next, they use 4 dice to cast the Withering on the Grail Knights, which the Bretonnians don't stop since the Hydra will already be wounding on a 2+. They use their last 6 dice to attempt Occam's Mind Razor on the Corsairs, but it gets dispelled. In close combat, the Hydra and Handlers take out 8 knights, and the remaining knight fails to wound and flees through the dangerous terrain and dies. The nearby knights pass their panic check, and the Hydra turns towards the action. The Bretonnians charge the Corsairs with all 3 of their central units, with the outer 2 units succeeding, but the central fails. The Pegasus Knights move to the Spearmen's flank, the upper Knights Errant move around the terrain, and the Questing Knights close in on the Spearmen. Winds of Magic and Scenario rules gives the Bretonnians 8 power dice against 7 dispel dice. They use 5 dice to cast their only spell, but it gets dispelled. In close combat, the Corsairs do 5 wounds and take 4 wounds from the Knights and Horses. The Knights lose the combat by 2, and both units run, with the larger unit getting caught and the nearby Knights passing the induced panic check. The Dark Elves start the 4th turn, charging the Questing Knights with their Spearmen. The Executioners charge the Central Knights, and the Hydra charges the fleeing Knights Errant, who flee through the nearby Knights, and the Hydra redirects into the combat. The Corsairs do a swift reform and turn towards the Lord General. The Cauldron moves up between the infantry blocks, and the Hydra moves up to the Pegasus Knights. For magic, the Dark Elves get 12 power dice against 6 dispel dice. They cast Occam's Mind Razor on the Spearmen with irresistible force, and in the backlash, the Sorceress loses a level and the Mind Razor spell and cannot cast anything else this turn. In the only shooting phase of the game, the Hydra hits the Pegasus Knights for 2 wounds, taking out 1 model, and they pass their panic check. For close combat, the Spearmen hit the Questing Knights for 6 wounds, taking out the unit before they get to attack, and reforming in the aftermath. In the upper combat, the Paladin issues a challenge, which the Dark Elf player accepts with one of his nobles. The noble hits the Paladin for 4 wounds, but all 4 get saved. The Paladin gets 2 hits, and the noble makes 2 4+ ward saves to keep his magic weapon from being destroyed, but he still takes 1 wound. The Corsairs do 4 wounds to the Knights, and the Hydra and Handlers get 1 more. The remaining Knights hit back for a single wound, but it gets saved. The Knights flee 10 inches, the Executioners pursue into the other fleeing unit and destroy it, and the Hydra catches the single Knight. On the Bretonnians' turn, they charge the Corsairs with their Pegasus Knights. The General charges the Hydra on his own, and the remaining Knights charge the Corsairs as well. The Damsel moves forward as their only normal move. Winds of Magic sees 8 power dice against 5 dispel dice. They use 6 dice to cast Flock of Doom, which fails to wound. In close combat, the Bretonnian general saves 1 wound from the Hydra's breath attack, and hits the Hydra with a Silver Lance of the Blessed for 1 unsaved wound. The general takes 2 wounds from the Hydra's normal attacks, and the handlers finish him off with a single wound that gets through a 2+ armor save. In the upper combat, the Corsairs take out 7 knights who do a single wound in return. They lose the combat and flee 11 inches, with the Corsairs pursuing 8. The Dark Elves charge the fleeing knights on their turn, who continue to flee off of the board, and the Green Hydra charges the Pegasus Knights. Normal movement sees an onslaught headed for the damsel. The Dark Elves get 3 power dice against 2 dispel dice. They use all 3 to attempt Penumbral Pendulum at the damsel, but it gets dispelled with a scroll. In close combat, the Hydra puts 3 wounds on the Pegasus Knights, and the handlers finish them off with 1 more. The Bretonnians move the damsel back up the hill and use 6 dice to attempt Flock of Doom, but it gets dispelled. On the final turn, the Executioners and Cauldron try to charge the damsel, but both fail. For magic, they get 6 power dice against 3 dispel dice. They cast Penumbral Pendulum on the damsel for 2 wounds and attempt Pit of Shades, but the spell fails by 1, and the knights rejoice as the damsel survives the battle. The final points total saw the Dark Elves with a marked victory and some very nasty looks from a very angry lady. Hope you enjoyed this battle report. Be sure and check back for more videos each week. Do us a favor and subscribe, and send us a message if you have any tactics or matchups you'd like to see, and like the video if you want to see more. Till next time from the Vidhammer crew, keep fighting.